Hey guys, you're watching Let's Talk About Prepping. I'm Tyler, your host, and in this video, we're going to once again continue our reading of the book Meditations on Violence, a comparison of martial arts training in real-world violence. Once again, I believe that this book is a very valuable resource for building and reassessing your outlook and your planned responses to violence. Now, I'll link the other readings below, but as always, the information contained in this section is valuable on its own. So let's get into it. Section 3.2, the 4 basic truths of violent assault. I investigated an incident between 2 inmates, an assault. As you read the description, be aware that this is the norm for a solo, unarmed attack. It is not special or unusual in any way. One was brushing his teeth. The other came up behind him and struck him on the right side of his head. The toothbrusher tried to turn but was pressed into a corner, punched again and again with hard rights until he curled into a fetal ball. Blood splashed, not smeared, onto the wall at shoulder height. The attacker broke several bones in his hand and did not know it. Not only did he break his own metacarpals and what is called a boxer's fracture, but he also had one finger deformed, bent, and twisted to the side. Until I pointed it out, he didn't know it. He started complaining of the pain hours after the assault. His hand was broken, but he kept hitting. I told the attacker that he was lucky. If the other guy had fallen or hit his head on the wall or suffered more serious injury, he could be looking at some heavier charges. He said, "Nah, I held his head with my other hand so it wouldn't hit the wall. I know how you guys trump up charges, and if I let him hit the wall, you try to get me for attempted murder." In the midst of this ambush, he was thinking. Most martial artists are completely unprepared for this. Most civilians who have learned what they know of fighting by watching carefully staged and choreographed movie scenes or skilled competitors in a test of skill and cunning can't relate to it. Do you expect the power of a sudden attack and a constant barrage, a shock and awe of speed and pain that comes on faster than your mind can process? Do you believe that there is a level of pain alone that will stop a committed attacker? Do you believe that a broken nose or the pain of a broken hand is a fight ender? Do you and the politicians and lawyers and judges really realize how rational a sudden assault can be? It's only sudden for the defender. For the attacker, it is planned. Do the politicians who write policy and statute understand that there's a subgroup of human beings who can savagely beat another human being while coolly thinking of their eventual court case? The 4 truths. Assaults happen closer, faster, more suddenly, and with more power than most people believe. Closer. One of the most common and artificial aspects of modern martial arts training is that self-defense drills are practiced at an optimum distance, where the attacker must take at least a half step to contact. Real criminals rarely give this luxury of time. They strike when they are sure of hitting, positive that their victim is well within range before initiating the attack. That half step of extra distance allows many things to work that are hard to pull off in real life. Blocks and evasions rarely work in real encounters. See Section 6.1, Stages of Defense. Even in the dojo, if you stand close enough that you can lay your forearm on your partner's shoulder, nearly optimum striking distance, and allow him to strike with either hand to targets of his choice, you will not block the strikes in time unless he telegraphs badly. Distance is time, and blocking takes time. The attacker always chooses the time and place for the attack, and he chooses a range at which he can surely hit hard, and his victim will have the least possible time to react. This means he will be close. Often, the ambush place will be in an area that hampers the victim's movements, a toilet stall, between 2 parked cars, or slammed into a wall. Will your favorite move still work without the room to turn or step? Faster. Because the threat has chosen the time, the place, and the victim, he can attack all out with no thought given to defense. The speed of this flurry, the constant rain of blows, can be mind-numbing. When your martial arts students are sparring, use a stopwatch and time how many blows are thrown in a minute. Even in professional boxing, the number is not that impressive. There is a give and take to sparring and subtleties of timing in defense and offense that are integral to making it a game of skill. Then time them on the heavy bag. Instruct them to hit as fast as they can for 10 seconds. Choose a 5-second interval early in the drill and count how many blows land. Tips. 1. It is easier to count by sound than sight. 2. Don't try to count past 20. When you get to 20, hold up one finger and start back at 1. 3. If you try to say the numbers, even mentally, you won't be fast enough. Completely untrained people usually do 4 hits a second. 8 to 10 times a second is reasonable for a decent martial artist. 13 to 14 is the highest I've done. An assault is conducted like this flurry, not like sparring. A competent martial artist who is used to the more cautious timing of sparring is completely unprepared for this kind of speed. Even the people who strike 10 times a second can't block 10 times a second. More suddenly. An assault is based on the threat's assessment of his chances. If he can't get surprise, he often won't attack. Some experts say that there is always some intuitive warning. Possibly, but if the warning was noted and heeded, the attack would be prevented. When the attack happens, it is always a surprise. This is one of the hardest aspects of an ambush to train for. The very fact that you know you are training removes the element of surprise. The unexpectedness of an attack can negate nearly any skill. You psych up for training, for competition. You have time to use breathing techniques to adjust your adrenaline balance in class, but an assault happens while you are in your 9 to 5 mind, when your brain is dealing with bills or shopping lists or lost car keys. More power. There's a built-in problem with all training. You want to recycle your partners. If you or your students hit as hard as they can every time they hit, you will quickly run out of students. Truthfully, the average criminal does not hit nearly as hard as a good boxer or karateka can. They do hit harder than the average boxer because of gloves or karateka has ever felt. Being hit is part of the normal environment of an attack. More often than not, the first strike in an ambush lands. So do many others. It can be a sharp and stinging pain, not like the dull ocean roar of a boxing hit or a kind of wincing where part of your face wants to curl over the point of impact. Good martial artists, good ring fighters, often freeze for a second because the attack doesn't feel like training. If anything feels, sounds, or smells different than you have trained for, your body will be aware that it is a new experience and might freeze. Fighting with a concussion doesn't feel like sparring. See the discussion of training and experience in Section 3.4. Section 3.3, the chemical cocktail. When you are put under extreme stress, various glands in your body release hormones into the bloodstream that have a profound effect on you, physically and mentally. The cocktail analogy is very apt. There are differences in the hormones based on the source and intensity of stress, and the cocktail affects different people in slightly different ways. Think bourbon and sake, happy drunks and mean drunks. Feel the emotional difference between rock climbing and public speaking. Different cocktails. When this effect hits, your body and mind change. This is one of the hardest things to address in training. The mind you train with will not be the one you have when attacked. This is a key problem. Very often, martial arts are an attempt to come up with a logical mental answer to a chaotic visceral problem. It is also very, very easy for students and teachers to either deny that this effect exists or to pretend that they can train it away. Flat out, breathing control only works to control the effects if you have time to use it. If you have time to take a series of breaths in a specific way to calm yourself down, the time and effort would usually be better spent leaving. Visualization works to give you a plan, but doesn't, to my experience, take the edge off the adrenaline. You can believe that if you train hard, you'll be okay, but do not let yourself believe that if you train hard, your body won't have natural physiological reactions. Some rely on the concept of mushin. I'll write about that in more detail later, but mushin is the concept that your body will do what it needs to do with the conscious mind turned off. The state does exist. It is very useful. It comes from dedicated, repetitive training. I can't say it won't be there for you if you have either experienced a lot of attacks or the particular attack matches your training very, very closely. It might. Don't count on it. There's a statistic floating around. At 7 yards or less, officers miss 92% of the time. I've heard the statistic from our police academy and in training sessions with the U.S. Marshals. I have no idea where it came from, and I haven't been able to find the source. However, NYPD statistics from 94 to 2000 show a hit percentage at 0 to 2 yards of 38%. Think about that. A trained officer at contact range to 6 feet away misses 62% of the time. At the firing range, it would be almost unheard of to miss at 6 feet. At 3 to 7 yards, they missed 83% of the time. There's more going on here than just the chemical cocktail. Just as a hand-to-hand fight is not like sparring, getting an accurate shot in a dark, slick, rainy alley while some tweaker slashes at you with a rusty knife doesn't have a lot in common with firing tight little groups at the range. But the chemical cocktail is part of it. In all likelihood, you've been scared enough to have the shakes, to feel your mouth go dry and your knees shake. You've wiped the sweat from your palms. Would it be easy to kick with your knees shaking like that? Hold the proper fist with your hand shaking? Skill technique degrades under stress. It degrades a lot. If you've ever heard or said, if it was for real, I would have done better, you've bought into a huge lie. When the stakes are higher, people do much, much worse than when the pressure is low. For a non-combat example, imagine a college-age young man. He's intelligent, holds witty conversations with his friends and family, and can strike up a conversation with a complete stranger and keep it going. This same young man, when he finally works up the nerve to ask the girl of his dreams on a date, will turn into a babbling idiot. It is a similar mix of hormones with a similar degradation of skills. In most cases, the young man's fighting skills in a real altercation will degrade about as much as his talking skills did in this scenario. Some of the hormonal effects are physical. Under the stress hormones, peripheral vision is lost and there is physical tunnel vision. Depth perception is lost or altered, resulting in officers remembering a threat 5 feet away as down a 40-foot corridor. Auditory exclusion occurs. You may not hear gunfire or people shouting your name or sirens. Blood is pooled in the internal organs, drawn away from the limbs. Your legs and arms may feel weak and cold and clumsy. You may not be able to feel your fingers, and you will not be able to use fine motor skills, the precision grips and strikes necessary for some styles, such as Aikido. Complex motor skills, essentially your coordination, will be hampered with a strong enough cocktail. Trapping, combinations, throws, anything that requires hands and feet working together will be gone. Part is also mental. Perception and memory can be wildly distorted. You may remember nothing, a blur, or incredibly precise details of inconsequential items. Time may seem to slow down, tachyphylaxia. You may freeze and see everything happen but not be able to move. Or you may think that you aren't moving when you are, but you are perceiving it in slow motion. Irrelevant thoughts will intrude. This is difficult to describe, but I've been in a fight and suddenly become obsessed with trying to remember what flavor our wedding cake was. Sometimes the irrelevant thoughts will seem like brilliant ideas or legitimate concerns that make no sense in reality. This can be powerful and can lead to some very bad places. I'll describe one of mine later. These irrelevant thoughts can be far more than distractions and lead to more than just bad decisions. In some instances, they can amount to a break with reality. No rational person would believe that a failed getaway attempt would be made better by taking hostages, or that in some way snatching your child will convince the judge to give you custody. But criminals do similar things quite often. Not just criminals either. Citizens, cops, maybe you have done something that was monumentally stupid, but seemed like a good idea at the time. Behavioral looping is very common. Sometimes a person, especially a rookie, will focus on a single technique that is not working, and he doesn't think to change it. It's very common in rookies to have them try to use the one technique that they really learned in training and just increase muscle and desperation when it doesn't work. Sometimes an officer or group of officers who are justified in using batons will run into a threat on which the baton doesn't work. Because focus blows with an impact weapon are the highest level of force below shooting, they stop there and just repeat the action, resulting sometimes in unnecessary injury. There is a chilling video available of the murder of Deputy Kyle Dinkler taken from his dashboard camera. Even as the threat loads a rifle, Deputy Dinkler stays locked in a verbal loop, repeating over and over, "Stop that," and "Stop loading that rifle." He continues in that loop until he is shot. As horrible as it sounds, as horrible as it is, all of these symptoms are survival responses for the worst case. You don't feel most pain, and neither does the threat. Pain compliance locks and nerve points won't work. If you get cut or bitten, there's less bleeding. When animals evolved this reaction, it wasn't about being mugged, it was about being mauled by a lion or a bear. Situations where freezing, silence, and not bleeding much are better survival strategies than trying to apply a nifty finger lock or spinning kick of doom. In 2003, a handful of us were pulled aside to put together a class for corrections officers who were going to have new duties outside the jail, such as court officers and high-risk transports. We had everything: sim guns, a real Glock that fires sub-caliber marking rounds, inert OC, foam batons, training tasers, armor for the bad guys, and a modular training area. The deputies would go into a scenario with a minimal briefing. Example, you're walking across the park by the courthouse and sent into a situation that could be anything from a medical emergency to a lost child to a baby held hostage. The class turned out to be a laboratory for adrenaline effects. Most of the students were veteran jailers. Many had hundreds of brawls under their belts. Many had not really experienced an adrenaline rush in years. Most were not gunfighters. We saw people adrenaline loop. Some that had trouble drawing from level 3 holsters that have 2 straps and an internal block shot after the scenario was over because they had locked into the idea. One turned and fired at a target that had been gone for several seconds but had just entered his conscious awareness. Many, when describing the scene after the scenario, added details that weren't there, like descriptions of the reporter's microphone when the role player had had an empty hand. At the academy, we were told one of the big mysteries of law enforcement. When criminals are shot several times, they usually get caught hundreds of yards away, climbing fences. When officers get shot, they curl up and die. I solved it in this training when I saw an officer shot in a scenario throw his hands up and say, "You got me." I was screaming, "Don't you dare die, you son of a bitch. Get back in the fight. You aren't dead until I say you're dead." But I realized that this was the key. For most of us, the last time we were shot was playing cops and robbers as a kid. If you get shot playing cops and robbers, you curl up and die. Unless you're a cheater. Cops were good kids. They didn't cheat. The mind searches for the last time they were shot, and they do what good kids do. They die. An image. After a scenario that lasted probably 2 minutes and involved a lot of yelling and a single trigger pull, the officer was gasping for breath, hands on his knees, shaking and sweating. "Sarge, I feel like I'm going to cry and I want to puke. Is that normal?" That is perfectly normal. There's an optimal stage of adrenalization. There's a point, you know it when you feel it, when you are on your game. You're alert, ready. Bruce Siddell, author of Sharpening the Warrior's Edge, has listed stages of adrenalization and indexed them by heart rate. As more stress hormones go into your system, the heartbeat goes up. He states that around 115 to 145 beats per minute, reaction time and fighting skills are maximized. Knowing this number won't help you a damn bit. Different cocktails. The predator versus the victim. As we've mentioned, the predator chooses the time and place. One of the side effects is that the predator can manage his own level of arousal. It's subconscious, but the predator will work himself up or work himself down to that 115 to 145 beats per minute range. The victim will be at normal until the first contact and then will shoot off the chart into the clumsy, frozen, perceptually altered territory already mentioned. It's not lightning. The hormones are released into the bloodstream, ergo, it takes one heartbeat for the effects to kick in. If an effective response has been conditioned, the victim can get in one strike/action in that time. The beauty of this reflexive counterattack strategy is that it is not what the predator was expecting, which can kick his heartbeat off the chart and level the playing field. Male and female adrenaline curves. In general, men get a big surge of adrenaline early that dissipates fairly quickly. Women have a much slower buildup and a longer cooldown time. Hence, a man will be ready to go berserk or freeze as soon as the engagement starts, and a woman will be able to think clearly for several minutes before she hits her deer in the headlights mode. This is easier to use offensively. If the threat is male, the longer you can put off the encounter, the less adrenalized and dangerous he will be. If the threat is female, the quicker you can end it, the less danger you will be in. You can see this effect in arguments between spouses. The argument heats up, the man gets angry and goes for a walk, slamming the door behind him. A few minutes later, maybe a half hour, and he's calmed down. He's ready to talk. It was all silly anyway, blah, blah, blah. He comes home ready to talk just when his wife is hitting peak anger. He hardly knows what hit him. The professional. With enough exposure, it is possible to become inured to certain types of violence. I know violence in my setting very well. I've literally had hundreds of jailhouse brawls, dozens of cell extractions, dealt with weapons and groups and ambushes several times. Many years ago, there was a guy in a cell screaming threats. He was on drugs, either meth or PCP, and/or he was psychotic. I opened the door, spun him around, swept his feet, and knelt on his elbow and neck. It all took about a second, maybe two. The officer who followed me in, a rookie, looked at my free hand and whispered, "Sarge didn't even spill his coffee." I looked down and sure enough, a full cup of coffee. It was a travel mug with a lid. This isn't a Jackie Chan movie. I took a sip while he put the handcuffs on. That was when I realized it was just a job. Because I am used to that type of violence in that environment, I do have access to the fine and complex motor skills. I can make things work consistently that a rookie or a martial arts master cannot. However, if the situation changes, I start over. In 2002, because of knee surgery, I was assigned to be the shooter for the CERT instead of being in the stack, the line of officers making the entry, where I belong. Shooting, most of it came back, the tunnel vision, the tachypsychia, and irrelevant thoughts. The chemical cocktail makes most people more dangerous. It often makes trained fighters less dangerous. It increases strength, short-term speed, and lowers pain tolerance. All good things. It decreases skill sets and fine and complex motor skills. Fine and complex motor skills only apply to trained fighters. Untrained people are going to flail anyway, and the hormone dump makes flailing more efficient. Trained people will often be forced to flail, eroding their efficiency. Mark McYoung, in The Professional's Guide to Ending Violence Quickly, said that you can see a shudder when the adrenaline hits. I haven't seen that. He then went on to describe 3 reactions to the chemical cocktail, and these I have seen. Some people get big, red, and loud. Their face flushes, they swell up, and try to intimidate with size and voice. They are trying to intimidate, pure and simple. They have more in common with the monkey dance than predatory violence. They are usually not a problem. Shock and stupidity. Shock is the inadequate perfusion of bodily tissue with blood and oxygen. In a very real way, shock is what kills people. Either the various organs don't get enough blood, or the blood they do get has inadequate oxygen. Bleeding to death is hemorrhagic shock. Heart attack causes cardiogenic shock. Fainting is psychogenic shock. EMTs are taught that one of the earliest signs of shock is agitation or nervousness. Far more often than I've seen agitation, I've often noticed another symptom, and it applies to shock, hypothermia, dehydration, hunger, sleep deprivation, and stress hormones. People tend to get really stupid ideas and then become extremely stubborn about them. This shows up in the behavioral loop, especially in the inability to see that the present action is not working and the resistance to changing the action. Small, white, and pale indicates a threat in a pretty advanced stage of adrenalization. His blood is pooled to his center and he is on the edge of panic. If something sets him off, he will go frantically insane. He will hurt you, much like a cornered animal. Some go flat when the adrenaline hits. They seem emotionless, alert. Eyes widen into a 1,000-yard stare. In general, they are experienced with the adrenaline state and can and will hurt you. They will retain a large percentage of skill. They make ugly opponents. On the good side, of the 3 types, these are the ones that can still communicate. You can talk to them. Alright guys, well I think that's going to do it for this video. I hope that it's been interesting, and if you would like a little bit more right now, do check out the links in the description box down below to some other readings from earlier in this same book. Stay tuned for more from this and other types of videos. Hope you're all doing well. Everybody stay safe out there.